Welcome to the Coaching Table. I'm Thomas Thompson, Executive Leadership Coach and Consultant with Lead Self, Lead Others. And the Coaching Table is a weekly experience I've created to help leaders like you have the conversations that you're not having, so we can really leverage your story and move it forward. Today, I want to give you a question about leadership, and it's this. Is your leadership imitative or intrinsic? Let me unpack that. Imitative leadership is where we lead out of how we have seen others lead. We observe how they speak, how they react, how they operate in different situations, and we try to follow that in our own life. A lot of younger leaders, this is how we learned how to lead. This is a great principle. We see Solomon practice this. The whole book of Proverbs is basically this principle. What Solomon observed in others, good or bad, and how he applied that in his own life. Paul, even in Corinthians, tells us, imitate me as I imitate Christ. What he's saying here is, you watch how I lead, and you do the same, as I'm doing the same thing with Christ. Imitative leadership is a great way, especially when you're a young leader, to learn how to lead. When I was younger and I was trying to get better at public speaking, I wanted to imitate somebody. And so I found someone that I really admired. It was one of my favorite leaders, and I would get cassette tapes of his messages. Now, after this video, you can go Google cassette tapes and find out what those are. But I would take these tapes and I would play his message, and then I'd pause it, and I would practice repeating what he just said, delivering the line like he did, using the language he did, using kind of the way he told a story or the way that he delivered a point. And I would learn that. And I was practicing and learning how to be a leader myself. Good leaders are learners. And imitating good leaders is a great way to groom your leadership. However, imitative leadership has a downside. And it's when we are trying to imitate skill sets or experiences that we just don't have. You know, the more that I practiced preaching like this guy and trying to deliver messages like that, the more I realized, he is wired so differently than me. His voice is so different than mine. His words just don't fit in my mouth. And I had to start moving towards figuring out, how has God wired me to speak? I think we see something similar when David goes out to fight Goliath. The King Saul comes to him and says, hey, David, put on my armor and fight like me. And David puts the armor on. He goes, this just doesn't fit. This is not me. God didn't make me this way. In fact, I believe if he had gone out and tried to fight like Saul, he would have failed. David took the armor off and said, I need to fight how God has made me to fight, without armor, without a sword, without a shield, with a slingshot. And that's where he saw the victory. What David was practicing there is something called intrinsic leadership. Intrinsic leadership is when you're not leading out of how you've watched others lead. You are leading out of how God has wired you and how God has invested in you over your life. Let me explain that. When you think about how God has wired you, God created you uniquely. There's been no one else ever like you, and there never will be again. You are unique. I love what God tells Jeremiah in Jeremiah 1. Before you were in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. This idea that God uniquely crafted Jeremiah and shot him out into this world to do what only Jeremiah was created to do. David echoes that when he says, behold, I am wonderfully and fearfully made. You are a unique creation, and God, I think it honors God when we unpack his creation of us. When we become self-aware of our gifts and our talents and our strengths and our weaknesses. I, for example, I do not have a nose for numbers. I do kind of have a way with words. God really made me to read and to write and to express things like that. And so if I'm on your team, you don't want me anywhere near the budget. But maybe I could give a speech about what that budget allowed us to do this year. That's my wiring. You also want to look at how God has invested in your life. As you look back over the last 10, 20, 30 years, what are some of the true highlights? What are some of the low heartbreaks? These are all times that God has walked through your life with you, and you have learned some powerful leadership lessons. And they have great power because you didn't read them in a book. You didn't hear them in a message. You didn't watch them on a 5-minute coaching video. They were born out of your own experience. You were there. And when you lead out of those experiences, there's power in them that impacts people. These are the mantras and the messages that leave a legacy. And the power is that no one can take this away from you because you were there. These are the kinds of things lessons from your life that you can speak about with authority. You don't have to spend energy on them. God brought you through something, or he taught you something, or he redeemed something in you, and you want for the rest of your life to lead people through it. Leading out of your God-given unique wiring and your God-invested life is intrinsic leadership. It's a higher level. I really believe it's more powerful. So let me leave you with a coaching table question for this week. How can you move from imitative leadership to truly tapping in to this intrinsic leadership that God's put in you? Moving from imitative to intrinsic. Well, I'd love to interact with you on that. You can scroll down and tap on my email and send me some of your thoughts. I'd love to talk with you about that. And I'll be back next week with another conversation about how to lead ourselves well so that we're leading others well. And until then, you're always welcome at the coaching table.